What's up, y'all? Thanks for coming back for part 2 of our What Happened to Alexander O'Neal story. On his first album, called Alexander O'Neal, O'Neal says that he didn't make much money. Matter of fact, he said he didn't make any money. Everyone else got the money, he would say, but he got the career. During this time, he would smoke weed from time to time, but he would only use rocaine occasionally. Now, on his second album, called Hearsay, he not only got a $100,000 advance, he also got 6 figures based on extra payments for concerts. The other problem that he was running into now is that weed was being replaced by rocaine, and he also didn't just want rocaine, he had to have it. In the midst of everything that he was doing, he found time to marry a woman named Debbie Weston. She was a woman that he said later that he loved her instantly. Even when he got married to Debbie, though, he was still playing the field. And true to what he normally does, he physically abused her. Along with that, he felt that his wife couldn't question him as to his whereabouts or what he was doing away from home. This dude was so bad and so stuck up and so arrogant that he was flying an ex-girlfriend into town just to spend days at a time with him. He thought all this behavior was okay. He didn't see anything wrong with it. He was making lots of money and he was providing for his family. So what the problem is, with more money came more rocaine. O'Neal got to the point where he was spending $1,000 a day on the stuff and having 3 to 4 dealers coming by to deliver it to him every day. It was so bad that the FBI thought he was a dealer and they raided his house. Ironically, when the raid went down, his wife got arrested instead of him, because at the same time she was getting arrested for his stuff, he was holed up with some woman somewhere else. As far as his drug use goes, he's never been apologetic about it. This is what he had to say. "This is no accident. This is a choice," he said. "I didn't get high because I had a problem. I didn't do drugs because I'm having problems. I did them because I wanted to." One comment he made related to his drug addiction was laughable, as if any of them weren't. This one was particularly laughable. "I wasn't disruptive in the studio," he said. "My work ethic was impeccable, except for when I was getting high." Soak that in, make of it what you will. Eventually, things came to a head between him, Jimmy Jam, and Terry Lewis, because it got bad enough to where the two of them had to convince O'Neal to go to rehab. Jam and Lewis put $4,000 of their own money up for the 30-day stint in rehab that O'Neal was supposed to go to. The sad part of it was, even in rehab, he still was getting his hands on weed and liquor, just not rocaine. He'd get those other two things because he'd have friends drop it off in the woods near the facility, and he'd go for a walk, pick it up later. The other way he was able to get away with these things while he was in rehab is they did not drug test him once the entire time he was there. Another thing that he was doing while he was in rehab was being hostile and aggressive toward the counselors. He went so far as to make one quit because he went so hard on them. "Move on to the next mofo," he'd say. "I am rehab," he proclaimed later. By the way, once he got out of the rehab, on the way home, he stopped at a dealer's house to buy some more rocaine. Over the years, he'd gone to rehab at least 4 more times. One time before a show, he got somebody to get him some rocaine. He got the rocaine and he used it, but what he didn't know is that it wasn't rocaine, it was another drug that begins with H that rhymes with rarerin, H. He had to perform immediately after that. And he was so messed up. He was singing, but not loud enough to be heard. He also fell asleep on stage in the middle of a song a couple of times while he's performing the song. How does that happen? He also fell off the stage, at which point somebody mercifully stopped the show. In another instance, he was so messed up that he sang the same song twice in a row. For days afterwards, he didn't even know he'd done it until somebody in his band told him while everyone was laughing at him for the past couple of days. Another time, he was driving on a revoked license to score some another drug that's not rocaine, that starts with C, that rhymes with rack. He was going to get some rack, quack, at 8 o'clock in the morning. After taking a few hits, he got stopped by the cops after he ran through a stop sign. Now, back to where he was currently in his career. O'Neal fell in love with London when he first visited there in 1986. He was a major R&B star in the UK. Even Luther Vandross had told him as much before he went over there. In 1989, O'Neal sold out Wembley Arena for 6 nights and made over $1 million for his efforts. After the release of his single All True Man, O'Neal was on top of the world. To him, it seemed like the ride he was on would never end. By then, he'd been sent to rehab by the label to several clinics, but he had enough of that. When he refused to go to rehab again, the outcome of that is that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis refused to work with him anymore. His next album, as a result, Love Makes No Sense, was the first one that he would do that wasn't produced by Jam and Lewis. It would also be his last album with Taboo Records. O'Neal felt that the album didn't do as well as it could have because the label didn't really support it. He also speculated that it happened that way because Jam and Lewis weren't involved with the project. He felt like the label was quiet quitting on him. However, around the time all this was going on, Clarence Avant left Taboo to take over at Motown, and he took Alexander O'Neal with him. Alex was at Motown for over a year, but he never released any music, never released an album. Why? O'Neal says it was because the label didn't want to mess with him because of his drug abuse. At this point in his life, despite all of his success, despite the $80,000 checks laid out in the bed and looking at it and hanging out with his boys and just having a pocket full of money at all times, dude was broke. Even though Motown was giving him $8,000 a month when he was there, he says he kept $250 of that for himself, which is beyond belief. Even in the 1980s, you're not going to be able to live on $250 a month in Los Angeles. Not in no place you want to live. There's no place you can live. We'll just say it that way. I think he's lying here, but that's what he said. He then claims he sent the rest to his wife and children who were still in Las Vegas. The main thing, though, which is why we know the $250 a month is a lie, is he was still trying to sustain that nasty drug habit that he had. Motown eventually cut down the $8,000 a month to $6,000 a month. He basically was getting this money not to record because he wasn't doing anything. After a year, enough was enough. Motown cut ties with him. He didn't have any place to go at that point. As I said briefly, a little bit ago, he was broke. So he had to move back in with his wife, but he couldn't afford to keep the lights on. And they had to steal electricity from an outlet in their apartment complex. Dude was flat broke now, and he couldn't even feed his kids. Of course, wife and kids be damned, he still needed to feed his habit. However, he was able to use his name to get drugs on credit. Eventually, he was able to get a gig in Germany that paid him $30,000. With that money, he was able to clear his debt with the dealers and to get off of their hit list. Around that time, his wife disappeared along with their kids, and O'Neal wouldn't see either of them for the next 4 years. Also at this time, he was $18,000 behind in his mortgage. He was $20,000 behind on his storage facilities. He didn't have the money, so some of his prized possessions, like his motorcycles and his pianos, were lost as a result. This dude's life was a mess. Now, while he was still married, he had the nerve and the gall to have a mistress. Her name was Cynthia, and she used to be one of his dancers. He'd stayed with her with his wife's permission. I don't even know how that happened, but he stayed with this woman named Cynthia with his wife's permission once when he was placed in an outpatient status after a drug bust. He did that for 4 months. After he got divorced, he went back to Minnesota and he began a life with Cynthia. And they've been together ever since. By this point in his life, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis now had their own record label, Perspective Records. They asked O'Neal to sign with them, and they offered him $50,000 in upfront money. However, instead of signing up with the guys that had rescued him from the scrap heap once and were giving him an opportunity to have the same thing happen again, he was more so worried about the fact that he was used to commanding anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000 in advance money per album, and he felt slighted by their offer. As a result, he decided to accept another offer from a record label that no one had ever heard of. Their offer was for $100,000. The record label was called One World Records. Didn't work out as expected. At first, they gave him $50,000, but him getting the rest of his money from those people was a nightmare. They piecemealed the remaining amount to him over time. $10,000 here, a little bit of money here, a little bit of money there. The resulting album that he made with them was called Lovers Again, and that came out in 1996. O'Neal was unhappy about the album because it had to be mixed in the UK and not in America, like they promised him it would be. He was mad because he felt like they had no idea how to mix R&B music over in the UK. To make matters worse, they put out a promo CD/EP, and there's a track on it of his producer singing one of the songs. O'Neal distanced himself as far away from the album as he possibly could. It would be 6 years before he would release another album. By now, he was broke again. And when he was approached by Bobby Z, Prince's former drummer, O'Neal desperately needed the money. So he took $25,000 to record an album for a label called Eagle Records. Reflecting on his past, this is a small sum of money to O'Neal. He lost amounts this large on trying to renovate an office in downtown Minnesota that he never even opened for business. In yet another waste of money, he had paid $10,000 in cash for 80 acres of land in Moose Lake, Minnesota. He never even got the deeds for the property. At that time, that amount of money meant nothing to him. The next album he would release would be called Saga of a Married Man, and it was released in 2002. It didn't do well, didn't chart in the United States, and it only reached number 160 in the United Kingdom. Looking back, O'Neal says working with Eagle was a nightmare. According to him, they did nothing for the album, and his fans didn't even know the album was out. Summing up his experience, he said, "It was another great Alexander O'Neal album we lost." After this, it would again be 6 years before he released an album. This time, the record label EMI promised that the album, Alex Loves, would receive a lot of TV promotion. But that never happened. The album didn't even chart in the States, and it peaked at number 49 in the UK. At this point, Alexander was resigned to taking gigs wherever he could to keep money coming in. He toured for 4 months, opening for Gladys Knight and the Pips. In the midst of all this, he was still trying to build a relationship with Cynthia. Additionally, he had some children that he had only seen once in their entire lives. When he finally reconnected with his daughters and Debbie after 4 years, he was dismayed that they were no longer Alexander O'Neal superstar girls, as he called them, who'd been all over the world. He proclaimed that they had become hood rats and hoochie mamas who showed him no respect. He says that despite giving the girls jewels and material things, they only pretended to be grateful for them. They may have treated him that way because he had 4 children outside of his marriage. However, instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he said that the greater responsibility lied with the women to prevent themselves from getting pregnant. He states that he told his kids that they may not have been a white picket fence, a dog, a cat, and all that ish, but this is the hardcore show business life. It's not going away because you were born. Sorry, this is something else. He then went on to say that all of his kids treat him like ish. They've all taken from him, but don't give him anything in return. What's more, they don't even want to deal with him. But they reach out whenever they need money. They don't call him on Father's Day or on his birthday. To quote him, "My kids never sent me no damn gifts." Finally, he claims to have set up separate recording sessions for his son and one of his daughters. Not only did they not show up, they also disappeared from his life. With Cynthia, O'Neal insists that his relationship with her is the last one he'll ever be in. He says that she taught him how to maintain a relationship. Don't beat her and don't cheat her. Didn't his mom tell him the same thing like 40 years ago about not putting your hands on women? Okay. But it took some woman. Anyway, he also says that if he had the types of conversations with his other wives that he had with Cynthia, he probably would have listened because he loved her that much. He also credits Cynthia with her being the reason he's still around today. Otherwise, he'd have given the press what they thought they were going to get for years, which is news of his demise. Before we close this episode out, I want to say this about Alexander O'Neal. This is a story that was initially intended merely to catch up on what he had been doing, talk about how great he was in the 80s and 90s, that type of thing. But it turned out to be the story of a man that was so selfish, that was so egotistical, that was so narcissistic, that everything bad that he did was always somebody else's fault. He put his hands on women and he abused women because nobody showed him how not to do that. His kids didn't deal with him because they're bad kids. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he was never there for them. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that he constantly cheated on their mothers. It had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that there were some of them that he had only seen once in their entire lives, and they were grown. It was very disappointing to find out that he is such a bad human being. Great singer, bad human being. I just wanted to put that in because sometimes these stories take on a life of themselves and they morph into something that was not initially expected. Okay, enough of the soapbox. Thank you for taking the time to listen to episode 2 of the What Happened to Alexander O'Neal story. For better or for worse, we found out. Thank you for taking the time. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, and repeat. Thank you again, and see you soon.